My love, not everyone is meant to be exceptional. My mother once told me over coffee, her voice wrapped in honey but laced with something final. And that's okay. Someone has to support the stars. I was 19 then, fresh out of West Point's induction, my uniform still creased, my pride still whole. Her words didn't sound cruel at the time, just factual, measured, as if she were offering a soft place for me to land. But those words became a quiet wound. Not deep enough to bleed, but sharp enough to echo. Every holiday, every family gathering after that, I heard them again, sometimes in silence, sometimes in how they praised my siblings. My brother, the major, my sister, the rising lieutenant colonel, the real stars. When I came back from my first overseas assignment, no one met me at the airport. "You're always so busy," my father said, like I'd missed a lunch, not just returned from a classified deployment. Once at Thanksgiving, a neighbor's son got my seat at the table because he'd just gotten into law school. I ate standing by the kitchen sink. My medals were still packed away in a box in the garage. That was the night I told myself I was done chasing their approval, done trying to make them see me. I had survived crossfire in places not even on maps. I didn't need to survive my family's indifference. But life has a strange way of circling back. And silence, well, sometimes it doesn't stay quiet forever. My name is Julia Hartman. I'm the eldest child of the Hartman family, and for 3 generations the military has been more than a career, it's been a legacy, a code, a quiet religion. We were raised on base protocols and dress codes. Our dinner table conversations were filled with ranks, deployments, and acronyms you need clearance to understand. My father, Colonel Richard Hartman, retired Air Force, still wore his medals when he walked the dog. My mother, Ellen, once served as a combat nurse during the Gulf War. She wore her silence like body armor. My brother Mason is now a major in the Marines. And my youngest sister, Caroline, the golden child, the rising star, she was about to be pinned as a lieutenant colonel. And me, I was the one they stopped talking about. After my first year at West Point, I disappeared, or that's what they chose to believe. They said I couldn't handle it, that the structure, the discipline, the pressure had cracked me. But the truth was, I didn't quit. I was recruited, handpicked for a covert intelligence program so classified, it didn't officially exist. No graduation, no photos, no recognition, just one-way tickets to countries where my last name meant nothing and surviving meant never being seen. I didn't get a framed diploma on the hallway wall. I didn't get a welcome home banner. I got silence, disbelief, absence in photo froze, erased with the precision of a forgotten draft. A cousin once told me without malice, just matter of fact, that my face had been cropped out of the family's last formal portrait. It didn't balance right, she said, as if my absence was just good aesthetics. They thought I left because I wasn't strong enough. What they never knew, what I could never tell them, was that I spent 6 months embedded in a Damascus safe house, gathering intel. That I lived inside the walls of a hostage compound in Tripoli, coordinating an extraction that saved 30 lives. That I lost 3 men in an operation I still have dreams about. But I wasn't allowed to say any of it, not without risking more than just my job. So, instead, I watched from afar as Caroline received awards, as Mason got married in his dress blues. And I clapped for them from the shadows. 'Cause that's what ghosts do. And for 20 years, that's what I'd become to my own family. People think covert work is all action and adrenaline. It's not. Most of it is waiting, listening, moving through rooms without being noticed. That part I was already good at. In the early years, I sent postcards from nowhere, blank fronts, vague greetings. My mother never wrote back. My father sent one response once, "Hope you're well." Caroline got her second commendation. That was it. When Caroline got promoted to major, they posted it all over Facebook. When I returned from a mission where I'd almost lost my leg, I didn't even get a text. I once spent 4 days inside the walls of a former embassy in Libya, sleeping next to weapon caches, coordinating a rescue for hostages that no one in the media ever acknowledged. I signed paperwork saying I'd never talk about it, never write it down, never even whispered over the phone. And I didn't. And meanwhile, Caroline wore her medals like jewelry at family dinners. She spoke at high schools about leadership and service. She was the one they built the photo wall around. I was the one who got asked, "So what are you doing now? Something with the VA?" I stopped correcting them. What was the point? Once, at a barbecue, a little niece tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" I crouched and smiled gently. "Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that brought 30 soldiers home to their families. That's better than any shot I've ever taken." She blinked, smiled, and ran off to play with a plastic tank. The message was clear, at least to me. In this family, service only counted if it came with a certificate, only if it was visible, loud, on a podium. What I had done, the lives I'd helped save, the risks I'd taken, was buried under classification and silence. My father once said, "We don't hang our hats on secrets." But maybe he never understood that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in rooms where no cameras are allowed. I wasn't gone from their lives, I'd just been quietly erased, and for a long time I told myself I was fine with that. But we all have a moment, a spark, something that reminds you you're still alive and still worth being seen. Mine came with a phone call I never expected. It was late September. The air had just started to turn, that crisp in between where summer still lingers but fall whispers its way in. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew the voice the moment she spoke. "Caroline's getting promoted next month," my mother said. "No hello. No how are you. Just business, you should come. Just don't wear anything weird. Don't make it about you." I almost laughed. Almost. "Instead," I said, "I'll be there." Not because I expected hugs or celebration. Not because I thought this was some olive branch. I went because I needed to see for myself if after all these years, if after all the silence, they could look at me and finally see the woman behind the shadow. That night, I stood in front of my closet. In the back, untouched for over a decade, hung my old dress uniform. Folded perfectly, still carrying the faint scent of starch and dust. Like it was waiting for a ceremony that never came. Next to it, I laid out a soft gray blouse and black slacks, neutral, quiet, unremarkable. Clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Clothes I could disappear in if needed. I stared at my reflection. The lines around my mouth were deeper now. My hair had more silver than gold. My eyes looked tired but clear. A face not young, but not defeated either. "Almost time," I whispered. I didn't know if I meant time to forgive or time to finally stop pretending. Maybe both. The drive to Fort Liberty took 10 hours. I made it in 9.5. No one met me at the gate. No one waited by the front door. The house hadn't changed. Same beige siding, same worn-out porch swing, same flag hanging just a little too proudly. I stepped inside. The air still smelled like lemon cleaner and paperbacks. And my mother, without looking up from the dining room table, said, "Go change your shirt. You're sitting next to Caroline. Don't interrupt her speech tomorrow." Just like that, as if I'd never left, as if silence was still the family's first language. The ceremony was held in one of Fort Liberty's grand halls, high ceilings, polished floors, flags perfectly spaced like soldiers at attention. Rows of folding chairs were arranged by rank and relation, a hierarchy even in celebration. I was seated 3 rows from the back, sandwiched between a junior officer's wife and a distant aunt who smelled like too much perfume and not enough kindness. Our row was labeled family, unassigned, a polite way of saying you belong to someone here but not really. Caroline stood at the podium, flawless in her dress blues. Her ribbons glinted under the overhead lights like a row of tiny medals for a war she hadn't fought alone. She smiled, poised and polished, every move rehearsed, every word weighed. She spoke about leadership, loyalty, and perseverance. Then came the part that landed like a stone in my chest. "I've learned," she said, with a graceful sip of water, "that true honor comes from staying the course. From never abandoning the trust placed in you when you put on the uniform." The air in the room tightened. It was a jab but dressed in silk, a subtle blade meant for me, and only I would feel the cut. I kept my face still. No reaction, just a neutral expression I'd mastered in interrogation rooms and diplomatic back channels. And then, the doors at the back of the hall opened. General Marcus Rawlins walked in, tall, composed, the kind of presence that makes a room straighten its spine before it even realizes why. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they landed on me. He paused, walked down the aisle. When he reached me, he stood at attention, raised his hand in a salute, and said, clearly, "General Hartman, it's an honor to see you again." The room didn't just quiet, it froze. Caroline's voice faltered at the podium. Her note cards trembled in her hands. Every pair of eyes turned from her to me. I stood slowly, returned the salute. Not for approval, not for spectacle, but because no man who once trusted me with lives should ever have to stand alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's hand slip, her water glass shattered on the floor. My father rose halfway out of his seat before sinking back down like someone unsure of where to put his pride. Behind me, a young officer whispered to his neighbor, not nearly as softly as he thought. "Wait, is that her? The ghost commander from Operation Watchtower?" And just like that, I was no longer invisible. I was seen. That night, I didn't stay at the family house. I returned to the guest quarters assigned to me on base Bland, beige, the kind of space meant to hold someone briefly and forget them quickly. I tossed my bag on the bed, kicked off my shoes, and that's when I saw it. A plain manila envelope sat squarely in the center of the desk. No name, no seal, no handwriting, just there, waiting. I opened it. Inside was a printout of an email forwarded from an encrypted relay, no sender listed. The subject line hit like a punch. Reckless operation, civilian casualties. The body of the message accused a J. Hartman of leading an unsanctioned mission resulting in multiple civilian deaths. It referenced an old classified operation, one so buried even the name had been scrubbed from formal briefings. And then I saw it, the phrasing. I'd read those words before. Not in a news article, not in any open source file, but in a highly restricted after-action report. A report I reviewed years ago in a steel-walled bunker in Germany. That report had only ever passed through 3 sets of eyes, mine, the lead analyst, and a junior officer who'd requested temporary clearance for training review purposes. "Caroline?" I stared at the paper, my pulse steady but my fingers tight around the edge. Someone had used that language word for word to make it look like I'd broken protocol, like I'd cost lives. And they'd sent it anonymously, but not carefully. The breadcrumb was small, but it was there. Later that night, at the after-party, I found her. She was holding a glass of champagne, still basking in congratulations. I waited until she stepped out for a phone call. Then I approached, held the printout up to her face. "Did you send this?" I asked. Her eyes scanned it, no flinch, no denial. "Yes," she said simply. "Why?" Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. And what she said next wasn't cruel, it was devastating. "It's 'cause you weren't supposed to win," she whispered. "You left. You didn't stay and build something. So you don't get to come back and still be more important." And just like that, I finally understood. Sometimes the knife in your back comes from the same hand that used to hold yours when you were scared of the dark. I thought the worst was behind me. But the next morning, just before dawn, a base-wide alert shattered the quiet. Not the usual bugle or morning routine, but a sharp, shrill alarm meant for emergencies. High clearance only. My phone lit up a second later. "Critical security breach. Report to command center. Immediate. I was dressed and out the door in 5 minutes. The halls buzzed with tension. Officers half in uniform, some still pulling on boots, others already at terminals, reading lines of code with clenched jaws. At the entrance to the ops center, a young sergeant handed me a slim black folder. His eyes didn't meet mine. Inside, confirmation of a classified data leak. Someone had uploaded files from a highly restricted mission, known only by codename, Operation Watchtower, a mission I had led. The file had surfaced on an encrypted darknet forum just hours before. It was real, it was recent, and the trace pointed back to me. Specifically, to a dormant device still technically assigned under my name, registered on the Fort Liberty intranet. A relic of a machine I'd last used years ago. It had been inactive until now. My name was on the metadata. By noon, I was sitting across from General Rollins and 2 officers from military intelligence. No one said the word suspect, but it was in the room, hanging in the air. They asked for full access to my personal and encrypted communications from the past 6 months. I didn't protest. I gave them everything. But something felt wrong, too neat, too convenient. My thoughts circled back to the envelope, the email Caroline had sent, the file she'd pulled language from, the words that matched the leak almost exactly. Coincidence? No, not with this many pieces aligning. I requested temporary access to the base's forensic tracing tools, and within the hour I had what I needed. I decrypted the metadata chain from the original anonymous email and traced the server trail. And what I found confirmed everything. The breach hadn't started with the leak on the darknet. It had started with that email, the one she sent years ago in secret, hoping no one would ever trace it. Only now it had triggered something dormant, a digital tripwire. And the system thought I was the one who pulled it. But I wasn't. and now I was going to prove it. The next morning, I walked straight into General Rollins' office and requested something unprecedented. I want to lead the internal investigation. He looked up from his papers, his brow rising. I'm still technically on classified reserve, I said. I have the clearance. I have the motive. And more than anyone else here, I have something to lose. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Approved, but you won't be working alone. What I didn't expect, what hit harder than any bullet, was the list of names handed to me for the task force. First, Colonel Richard Hartman, my father, assigned to manage archived campaign intel. Second, Ellen Hartman, my mother, called in to support forensic trace analysis, using her old field medic training and her minor specialization in biological decadence. And last, Lieutenant Colonel Caroline Hartman, my sister. She would be responsible for auditing system access logs and internal vulnerabilities. It was like being dropped into a war room with ghosts. Every person in that task force had a history with me, and not one of them had ever seen me fully. The first meeting was as cold as expected. My father gave a report without looking at me once. His voice was flat, his tone clipped. He sounded like he was delivering a eulogy for a stranger. My mother took notes quietly. Occasionally she glanced at me not with judgment, but like she was studying someone she used to know and didn't quite recognize anymore. Caroline went last. Her presentation was efficient, technical, distant. She never lifted her eyes from her screen. We worked like strangers bound by duty, nothing more. But I didn't need warmth. I needed facts. For 3 days we dug through logs, access points, and system redundancies. At first there was nothing new, just recycled theories and digital dead ends. Until one night, deep in the archived data nodes, the system flagged an anomaly. Buried in a logistics file from 2017 was a dormant Trojan, a piece of malware never activated, never used, just waiting. Quiet. Hidden. The date on the file matched a time when I had clashed publicly with a military strategist named Derek Grayson during a joint mission briefing overseas. I'd blocked his aggressive plan that would have endangered civilians. He hadn't forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, he'd left something behind. Not for then. But for a moment like now, when someone would come along and accidentally wake it up. The discovery shifted everything. The malware hadn't been triggered by a deliberate attack. It had been hiding, waiting for the wrong person to open the wrong file at the wrong time. And Caroline had done just that. She'd accessed the archived system node for her own reasons, maybe to pull old phrasing for that email smear. Maybe something else, but she'd unknowingly activated the tripwire Derek had left behind. A quiet digital landmine. That night, my mother handed me an old folder worn at the edges, the name faded in ink. You left this behind after Watchtower, she said softly. I read it. Back then, I thought you were hiding something. Now I think you were just trying to survive. Her words weren't an apology. They were something deeper, recognition. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel seen. Later, we traced a failed log scrubbing attempt to an IP address just outside the base at a roadside motel, paid in cash under a name we hadn't heard in years. Derek Grayson. He had returned to the system's blind spot, the one he used to oversee, and he'd tried to cover his tracks too late. A raid team moved fast. Inside a dusty relay room long abandoned, we found him mid-upload, his face lit by the glow of a terminal. He didn't resist. He simply looked at me and said, "Took you long enough." In the interrogation room, Derek confessed without bravado. "I didn't want to destroy you," he said. "Just wanted you out of the room. You climbed too fast. They stopped asking questions. You became a symbol, and I wanted that gone." The plan had been cruel, yes, but strategic. He'd watched our family splinter and saw a crack wide enough to crawl through. And Caroline, unwitting, jealous, had given him the door. Caroline read the transcript of Derek's confession in silence. Her eyes scanned each line like they might rearrange themselves into something less damning. But they didn't. When she finally looked up, her voice was low, almost fragile. "I didn't know what I did would lead to this. I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but to hold the ache in place. Sometimes," I said, "we set fire to a dry field because we're jealous and forget people sleep in that grass." She flinched, but she didn't cry. Not then. The next day, while compiling the task force's final report, Caroline submitted a formal addendum. In it, she accepted full responsibility for initiating the original chain of emails that, unknowingly, led to the breach. She wasn't criminally charged, there was no intent to leak state secrets, but the consequences were still sharp. She received an official reprimand, and she lost her eligibility for promotion for the next 5 years. She signed the document without hesitation. Not to redeem herself, but maybe to finally stop pretending she hadn't made a mess of things. At the final task force meeting, we sat across from each other once more, but this time she didn't avoid my gaze. And when our father stood to offer closing remarks, he paused, looked at each of us, then said, "I owe this entire team an apology, especially Julia. I let medals and pride blind me to what really mattered." It was the first time he'd ever admitted fault. And he did it in front of the one person he once refused to believe in, his eldest daughter. The regional strategy conference arrived 2 weeks later, cloaked in heavy fog that settled over Fort Liberty like memory. I stood backstage, calm, steady, beneath the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of boots on tile. The banner behind the stage read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare Intelligence in Asymmetric Environments." Over 60 commanders and high-ranking analysts had RSVP'd. One of them, Lieutenant Colonel Caroline Hartman, listed without honors, without fanfare, just another officer among many. I had sent her the invitation myself, no message, just one line in the notes. "It's time to learn what you thought I never knew." When the lights dimmed, I walked to the podium, no escort, no applause, just the silence of anticipation. I opened with something simple. Some missions never get a name, some leaders never get a plaque, and some battles don't start at borders. They start where understanding ends and judgment begins. Murmurs in the crowd, a few tilted heads. One officer leaned to another. "That's her. She wrote the doctrine we use in the Balkans." Caroline sat in the second row, spine straight, pen poised. She didn't blink. Midway through, I did what no one expected. I shared publicly a decision I'd made during Operation Watchtower, one that could have cost my career. I'd overridden a target strike because 7 children were hiding in the building. Sparing them nearly ended my clearance. But I stood by it. "I don't share this for sympathy," I said. "I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs to be seen." Gasps echoed, not from drama but recognition. War was no longer just about borders. It was about the weight of choice. And leadership. Leadership was knowing which burdens you're willing to carry when no one is watching. As I stepped away from the podium, I turned to the side microphone and said, "To conclude, I've invited Lieutenant Colonel Caroline Hartman to share her reflections as a next-generation officer, and as someone I've watched become more than her rank." Caroline stood slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. Her voice wasn't flawless, but it was real. I grew up believing that accolades were the finish line, that standing tallest meant being seen. But today I realize something else. True honor is knowing who you've learned from and having the courage to admit it. The room rose in a standing ovation, not for her alone, not for me either, but for the idea that maybe leadership could be quiet. That strength didn't always shout, and sometimes forgiveness looked like understanding, not forgetting. In the back row, my mother sat with her hands folded. She didn't clap, but she nodded. And for the first time, it felt like approval, not of what I'd done, but of who I'd become. Later that night, as the hall emptied and medals were packed away, I walked alone toward the barracks. The evening air was soft, like a memory that no longer hurt. Behind me, footsteps caught up. "Caroline." She handed me a small birthday cake in a clear plastic container. No candles, just 3 words written in blue acing. "General, Sister, Teacher. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. In the end, I didn't want a statue or a speech. I just wanted them to see me. Not through medals or mistakes, but through eyes that once misunderstood and now finally saw the whole truth. That some battles leave no scars on the skin, but carve canyons in the soul. And the greatest victory is learning to be seen without needing to be loud.